Alrighty. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It looks like some people are still trickling in. And so while people join, we're going to start off with a quick video, and then we'll jump into our discussion.
Industries are under increasing pressure to know their customers like never before, to develop differentiated products and to expand into new markets. Today, they must apply intelligence, predictions, and personalization to move business forward. This puts data at the forefront of innovation, so real-time access to data has never been more important or so difficult. The elephant in the room is that today's technology is much too complex, is too expensive, and is unable to adapt to the distributed nature of data. Organizations have reached a tipping point where the effort needed to enable real-time customer experiences, advanced analytics, and machine learning far exceeds the value they can create. But all of that is about to change. Introducing Molecula, an entirely new paradigm for continuous data analysis. For data engineers, the platform provides a centralized, real-time feature store built for the most advanced high-concurrency analytics, machine learning, and AI. For application developers and data scientists, Molecula delivers millisecond performance and continuous analysis with ultra-low latency queries. For IT and security teams, Molecula enables anonymized data sharing, reduces data footprint 10 to 100 times, and eliminates the need to pre-aggregate data. With Molecula, you can predict customer behavior and personalize user experiences in real time, diagnose patients faster and more accurately, and identify fraud and anomalies instantly. Molecula's platform is built to solve the most complex analytical and AI needs orders of magnitude faster than other technology. Unlock the power of real-time access to data with Molecula.
All right. So my name is Sarah King, and I am so excited to be here with our special guest, Adam Massey. And so again, I'm the director of product at Molecula, and I'd love to hand it over to Adam, CEO of 1433, to do an intro of himself.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
So excited to be here today. My name is Adam Massey. I'm founder and CEO of F33. We are a modern data science, machine learning, and cloud services company. And we really focus on applied AI, so helping enterprises, both small and large, apply data science and machine learning to business problems to help them be more effective. We also do a bunch of things that underpin that around data engineering and cloud, but at the end of the day, what we really focus on the most is helping companies drive transformations with data science and machine learning to do incredible things with their data.
Awesome. I'm so excited to talk to you about supercharging AI with our partnership. And as I mentioned, I lead product at Molecula. And as you saw in the video, Molecula is an enterprise feature store that simplifies, accelerates, and controls big data access to power machine scale analytics and AI. And as the video explained, we believe that there's a tipping point in data access where effort needed to enable real-time use cases and getting data ready for machine scale workloads is far exceeding the value that's able to be created with data. And we're seeing enterprises spend tons of money preparing and aggregating and making copies of their data for every project before they can make decisions with it. And so Molecula brings an entirely new paradigm for continuous real-time data analysis to be used for all of your mission-critical applications. And I've been with the team since our previous company where we invented our core technology. And I've built my career at companies like Under Armour and Humble, really helping to commercialize big data. So I've experienced this tipping point firsthand. And so I'm really excited to be here to talk about our partnership with F33. And we've really formed this partnership to bring scalable AI and ML to businesses that are overwhelmed with the big data in their ecosystem, to derive value out of it much faster than they would normally be able to. And I think that goes hand in hand with this kind of topic of next gen AI and ML. And I'd love, Adam, for you to kind of share with the audience the inception story of F33 and kind of how all of this is tied together with why you started the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Sarah, you nailed it. I really think we are on the cusp of a huge shift in technology enabled by machine learning. And so this topic's very timely. I actually spent 12 years at Google Cloud in various leadership roles. And towards the end of that, I started to notice this pattern where, Google Cloud, as an example, and a lot of the bigger cloud providers were starting to drive incredible innovations around data and even in machine learning and across that whole stack. But what I started to notice was their pitch was getting really good and customers were starting to really resonate with customers. But then the next step, like how do you go from the pitch to actually starting to actualize the pitch, was very difficult for most customers. And I started to observe a pretty big divide between, companies who were very, very modern, kind of native cloud, native tech companies who were able to start to tap into this stuff. And then there was everybody else. And so as I started to see that over and over again, I, basically got inspired to go start F33 to try to help close that gap and try to make some of these technologies, not just the technologies, but really the business outcomes that these companies can derive from data science and machine learning, far more available and accessible. And so part of that, I think too, is like, we're in the middle of a technology shift, and we've seen many examples of this through history, right? And as that technology shift happens, you see interesting things happen in the tech stack. Simplification occurs, innovations come to the market. And I think we're in that right now where like a couple years ago, even just like 5 years ago, I think most CEOs would say, oh, AI, that's magic pixie dust. There's more talk and buzz than reality there. I would even say when I started this company 2 years ago, people would kind of challenge me with that, like, okay, well, a lot of buzz, is it real? And so now I think, especially probably accelerated with the COVID crisis that we're in, it's no longer just real. It's like an imperative for most companies. If you're just analyzing data, you're behind, but the companies that are going to thrive and survive, of course, are the ones who can actually go further and put data to work to drive predictions, business optimizations, and all those things. And the cool thing is that stuff is all available today. It's just most companies need a little more guidance and help figuring out how to assemble the building blocks to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am kind of like giggling at this quote. I had to put it in here when I saw it from Gartner, claiming even through this year, 80% of AI projects will remain alchemy, run by wizards whose talents will not scale in the organization. And I agree with you. We're seeing this shift to where it is going to become more broadly available, but I think that this is still a conception in market. But we know for a fact that companies are seeing massive returns on investment. And you kind of talked about this like disruptive business market that we're in due to COVID, kind of pushing people to really seriously embrace the data that they have to drive business outcomes. And I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit about this gap. What is the difference between the leaders who are seeing these massive improvements in business and what's holding the laggards back? And maybe also sharing just some business examples as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is very relevant, right? So to dramatically simplify where I see customers in that spectrum today is you've definitely got a group that are leaders and they've figured this out. Most of them are tech natives and they're doing incredible things, but they've also got incredible resources. So they've got data science teams and big teams behind this who have figured out how to make it work for them. Companies like Uber come to mind, right? Or Spotify, right? These are companies who have built ML into their business, into the fabric, where it's not just like a feature, it's a core part of how you experience their product and their value. Spotify is literally in real time analyzing, song choices to curate playlists for their customers. That's the value of Spotify, right? Is you can just kind of have it figure out what you want to listen to. Google Photos is another example, right? Google Photos, it's ingrained in there. So like Google Photos will just serve up pictures and choose pictures for you and put albums together for you. Uber's actually got some great stuff they've talked about. Like you can look up Michelangelo, where they've built these incredible data science architectures, but most companies don't have those resources. It's not their core. They're trying to figure out how do they enhance their core by applying this stuff. So then you get to like the other two categories. I'd say there's a category of what probably would be called laggards. I don't mean that in a negative way, but they're trying to figure out where to start. AI is not their core business. These are probably healthcare organizations, financial services organizations, retailers, manufacturers, and they're trying to figure out, they know they need to use data in an intelligent way to be more competitive, more efficient, and they're trying to figure out how to start. And then there's a group in the middle, and the middle group's super interesting, where like they've started to do this, and this is a big theme for our partnership, right? It's like, these are companies who they've hired a couple data scientists, they've brute forced their first model. And I say brute force, like incredible amounts of effort to get a single model working, but they haven't figured out how to systematize or scale it yet, like the Ubers and the Spotifys that we talked about a moment ago. So there's this this journey customers are on. How do I start? How do I get to model number one, machine learning model number one? And then how do I really build this into the fabric of my company such that it's how we operate? It's how they become data science driven, which is a big theme that we talk with our customers about.
Yeah. And something that actually really stood out to me that you just said about the leaders is that AI is at the core of their business. And I think what I've seen with our customers is that they're applying AI to advance their business mission. And so having those two things converge, there's magic there. Yeah. And we recently had this amazing opportunity for one of our customers, the CTO, Adam Blue at Q2 Banking, speak at a Forrester event, their virtual event, and hearing him talk about how they're applying machine learning to achieve their mission was like tear jerking. And so their mission is to build, and I took notes here. So build strong and diverse communities by strengthening their financial institutions. And Q2 eBanking does all of the online banking for small and regional banks. So these are banks that are competing with the Wells Fargos and the Chase banks of today who have this more advanced AI application. And what Q2 infuses into these financial institutions is fundamentally understanding their customers' financial journeys. So as opposed to trying to sell or get a user to sign up for a new credit card because it has a lower percentage rate than another credit card they have, Q2 is saying, no, look at like is this user financially secure? Are they financially insecure? What type of accounts do they have? How likely are they to travel? Like all of these various indicators of your customers are going to tell you how to interact with them in the best way possible. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be really excited about this credit card. But the more that you can attach yourself to their financial journey, the more likely they are to stay with you for their entire financial journey. And so that kind of evolution of thinking of data being this kind of way to sell frontline goods to data creating a deep relationship that creates loyalty and trust is a really exciting kind of shift in thinking. And Q2 has now started to exactly what you said. They've seen success in kind of one use case, and they're starting to kind of transition those learnings across many aspects of their business.
And I would actually add to that. I mean, what I've seen is that's the best way to go, right? So the companies who start by building a laboratory and doing experimentation, they tend to get stuck there for a while. And then making the leap from the lab to production can be difficult. The companies where I see and I applaud the approach is start with the use case. Figure out a really good business use case where you can apply this for impact, figure it out, and then you can start to really build momentum across it. But you're right. And I would just kind of add a couple more quick examples would be, in the last year, we've had a crazy year, right, with COVID, and every business is reality changing in one way or another. I've seen that kind of accelerate the interest in machine learning applied to business, because companies need to rethink how they do customer acquisition. How do they attract customers? How do they figure out which ones to focus their precious sales and marketing resources on? Data intelligence is a great way to think about that. how do companies operate more efficiently? So great example, we're talking with a bunch of retailers about rostering, like solving this problem of, as you start to reopen retail stores, how do you ensure, like, you don't know what demand's going to be like? How do you make sure that you don't understaff or overstaff the retail floor to, either hurt or, hurt your business experience, your customer experience, or kill your overhead? So like things like that we're seeing a lot of drive to think about, how do you create these ML powered use cases around prediction and optimization to drive customers acquisition, customer retention, operational efficiency and cost reduction, those things that are now more important than ever, that are very, very efficiently done through ML. And so that's really starting to kind of push this more into the forefront.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I jumped the gun on this slide a little bit, but a lot of what we're talking about reminds me of this term that the CEO of Rakuten, he goes by Mickey, uses and has infused into their business processes. So he feels that the secret to success for entrepreneurs is this concept of Shikumika. And that's the Japanese word for systemize. And this applies to ideas and processes and projects that derive value in some way. You are hurting your business by not systemizing that value across your entire business. Because once you start to do that, the growth of like benefiting from that value is exponential. And so this is really aligns with kind of your way of thinking around what the difference is between leaders and people kind of lagging behind. And I love this application to next gen when we're thinking about machine learning. And the reality of machine learning is that AI is incredibly challenging to Shikumika today. And Algorithmia does an annual report that is a state of enterprise machine learning. And so they launched this report for 2020 earlier this year. They surveyed just under 1,000 enterprises. And out of the respondents, only 55% of companies 55% of companies who are exploring machine learning have not yet deployed a model into production. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But one of the biggest inhibiting factors that we see talking to customers is data readiness. And organizations today still face data access issues. And our CEO lovingly calls this the data death spiral. And I love this metaphor for the state of data challenges within an organization. And it's the concept of, army ants are so focused on this like scent in front of them from the ant in front of them that they end up like going into this death spiral to their demise of exhaustion. And so they really can't see the forest from the trees is really the takeaway there. So rather than an overarching coordinated data access strategy, every data project is so narrowly focused that it causes this like massive fragmentation and copies and proliferation of disparate and siloed data. And I'd love for you to kind of see, on the flip side, those models that do get into production, over 40% of them take more than 30 days to deploy. And I'm curious kind of what you see with your customers as to why that happens.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is great. So we talked before about like those three groups, right? Like the kind of the laggards, the people struggling to do it very manually, and then those who have Shikumika, right? Like systematized. This is very much a representation of those first two groups, right? Like, and I actually agree with these numbers. I think that I would have probably, based on our customer exposure and experience, would have guessed something along these lines. So yeah, 55% here, they don't even know where to start because it's too hard. Like the initial barriers to entry because of data readiness, data access, the technology components, the personnel expertise, all that is too big of a hurdle. The 40% here, this is really interesting. And so this is where a lot of our customers fall into this bucket where it's like, they see the value, they've tried, but it's really difficult, right? It's like running in sand because the deployment challenge is because it's manual. Like they are figuring out, I used that brute force word before, but it's like, we're going to talk a lot about a feature store today, and this is not meant to be a shameless plug for the feature store, but most customers don't have a feature store. So every time they get their data scientists geared up to build model number one or number two, They've got to start figuring out features, which is, a key part. It's variables, effectively, key part of a machine learning model. They've got to engineer those features from scratch. They're not pulling them from a library or a feature store that's ready. They've got to figure out how to get the data access. The deployment side, there's all these calculations that are really challenging that need to be happen to create the data pipelines. Deploying the models is challenging. A lot of times they don't even have the organizational alignment. Like, say, if you're deploying a model for use in a software product, you've got to have really deep alignment with the software release cycles and the software leadership team. And so there's just a lot of pieces here that until you systematize it, you're figuring it out step by step. And I would say for sure, way more than 30 days to deploy in many cases. And the challenge with this stuff is everybody, can understand is like, this data, 30 days can be a lifetime in a lot of businesses. So it's like, by the time you get the model deployed, you're having to go back and re-engineer your features because the data reality has changed. And so this is very, very much a great representation of, I think, the struggle most customers are trying to navigate through on their way to figuring out how to run a system that scales for them. But it's challenging. And actually, this is like our core business, is trying to help them figure out the elements of people and process and technology to unlock this so that it's smooth and fast.
Yeah, awesome. So we've been talking a lot about next gen. And I, and thinking about like truly like deep down what that means, it was really fun to kind of go back in my mind and reflect on where we've been over the past decade. And when we say next gen, really what this means to us is that machine learning is ready for broad adoption. And so kind of traveling back in time a decade ago, we really started to see this big data boom, and data science skills were coming onto the market. These libraries and tools started to have budding communities in the open source software world, and teams started to throw money, and a lot of it, at siloed kind of R&D arms to really figure out how data science can be applied to their businesses. And as we kind of came into the middle of the decade, with my consumer hat on, it felt like we were interacting with AI all the time, because these kind of tech darlings and FANG stocks were implementing AI at a massive scale. But this image here makes me laugh, because this is kind of what people associated with AI. It's that like pixie dust term that you mentioned earlier. And I really feel like between 2015 and 2018 was when this like peak of inflated expectations around AI really was peaking. And then we kind of hit a drop where venture was like, AI is pixie dust and I'm not investing in AI anymore. And now we're really starting to see this like uptick of the slope of enlightenment. And I would even argue that we're like hitting the plateau of productivity. And we're, as you said, on the cusp of this new generation that where AI is broadly applicable and adoptable. And I would love to kind of have you talk a little bit more about, where we are right now and where we're going.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so this is a great slide, because it takes me back, but it also helps us see like some of the foundations that we built upon, right? So it wasn't that long ago. I can't believe it's been 10 years, but like that big data was like this new thing, and it was a buzzword that everybody was talking about, right? Like our CTO would claim, hey, I've been doing data science for 15 years. But yeah, when he was doing that, it wasn't really called ML or AI. It was like predictive analytics. And so probably a precursor in some ways to big data. So I think what this represents, though, is this maturing of the market, the technologies, the understanding of how to apply those technologies, and building on these foundations, right? So if you go way back to the kind of the origins of Hadoop and big data, that was the beginning where people, I think, outside of these very, very specialized communities started to see that data can be an asset because of the technologies that are available to unlock it in much more real time to make business decisions. It started to build on that. And I think, 5 or so years ago, you had the emergence of Spark and, various different technologies on the market in languages like Python that started to unlock the ability to start building machine learning models that really underpinned some of those tech darlings we talked about, enabled them to kind of figure this out. But I think what this represents is, like any sort of maturity model, we've started to see the technologies drive more upstack automation. And so where, if our CTO talks about, it wasn't that long ago where like all he was really using was Python offline, in building models. Now there's so many more components represented with some examples here, APIs, different software platforms that start to automate more and more and more of this. And so companies start to feel or start to be able to benefit from technology automation, automation of process, and much more expertise on the market to do some of these. So there's a lot of technologies that are listed here that are all about democratizing AI. That's relevant for some use cases, not for all, but trying to make some of, bottling up some of the process best practices and technology best practices so that a business analyst can do some pretty incredible things without even needing a data scientist. So we're heading in that direction. And businesses can benefit from this. I think the biggest challenge companies still face is most technologies don't help you figure out how to culturally shift your organization and how to hire the right people and how to apply the right process that works for your own products and goals. But we're getting there. And so we're seeing tons of opportunities to move up stack and focus on the higher order problems rather than some of the very, very deep ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like even as we kind of enter this new era of data science and ML in production, we're going to see a significant simplification of architectures and environments where as we have tools that help us automate processes, a lot of the kind of band-aids that we have applied over the last decade are really we can finally take them off. And I am nervous and excited to share this slide all at the same time because at first glance, it's incredibly overwhelming, but we had to put this in because Andreessen Horowitz just published this blog post over the weekend, and our teams have just been obsessing over it because what Andreessen Horowitz kind of went out to do over the past couple of years is talk to as many enterprises and portfolio companies as possible to understand what data proficiency means in the enterprise and what architecture is required to get there. And so without being super overwhelmed, looking at this in these columns, what we're seeing is sources of business related and operational data. And then to do any analysis on that data, we have to extract that data out and go into this next column, transform it, load it into storage systems that allow us to then go again to the right column here in the querying and processing to do historical analysis. So what has happened in the past, and then enter into this like predictive what's going to happen in the future, and then pushing all of those outcomes into some sort of output, whether that's a dashboard or augmented analytics applications. And when I look at this, I just want to push back on it because it feels like there is this kind of linear kind of prescription of like you're going from zero data to BI infrastructure to this like multimodal infrastructure. And then once you're here, then you can start to build out this AI stack. And if you go and read the article, there are multiple blueprints kind of walking through this, and this data science stack like expands pretty significantly. And it just feels like there has to be, a better way. And I think that, a lot of this has come out of Band-Aids being placed on, okay, I can't do analytics across all of these source systems here. So we have to, add this layer. And then again, going back to what you just said around this like cultural shift in organizations, a conversation that we've been having internally recently is the like data warehouses and data lakes have really come about because of a like cultural problem within organizations. It was incredibly difficult to access data across disparate departments. And so having a central place where that data is being dumped and then you can figure out what to do with it is kind of the impetus for these systems. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, Adam, like, can this be circumvented? Is this linear? Like, Can you, like, what does evolution look like from the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think so that you're going to see contraction and expansion depending on this, right? So I think we're going to see data sources explode as they should, because you're going to have new technologies like your own technologies are going to create more data access to a much more distributed, different sets of data that exist in different silos. And so that's a good thing because you can get more data into models where you can do more things. I think you're going to see contraction on kind of the middle part, right? Like, how can we simplify that middle part so that there's less moving parts that have to be orchestrated in real time, right? So like right now, you're right. A lot of these are Band-Aids because there's a lot of complexity in the middle. You've got tons of different data sources that need to be fed into various different systems, which you can then start engineering features on, building models on, and then there's a whole nother process for deployment. So like, I think that this is ripe for simplification. This is way too complex for most companies out there. And I think that's what we're trying to do together is like help more companies that don't have, a team of 20 data scientists who don't have ML as their core business product, figure out how to tap into this and get to the outcome faster, not have to think about paring down data sources, but figure out how to open it up to get more meaningful insights, better predictions, better optimizations, and then automate how those are deployed, right? That's the big thing, because I'd say there's two sides of this that I see companies really struggle with. One is getting access to the right data in the right format, of course. And the other one is like, how do you rapidly cycle through that and deploy models for impact? And so those two sides are the areas that, I think we can help companies really simplify by cleaning up this middle part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you had said this isn't a shameless plug for a feature store, but in a way, how we view the world and where we see this evolution of simplifying the stack is a centralized place that holds all of the attributes of your most important entities within a business, that whether those are customers, patients, devices, events in time, and storing them in a format that's AI ready, but can easily plug into CDC pipelines, transformation and event processing pipelines, and be used for both analytics and machine learning. And so, I definitely agree with like the opportunity to greatly simplify the stack. And yeah, I don't know. I'll stop there.
I'll just sort of say like, if you're attending this as, someone on the business side who doesn't have a ton of hands-on experience with data science or machine learning, and you're starting to lean in, you're going to hear more and more and more about feature engineering and feature stores. I definitely encourage you to look into it, but this is what we consider kind of like a linchpin part of the process, part of systemizations, Shikumika. That's a hard word for me to say, but anyway. So feature store is really critical because at the end of the day, when a data scientist is building a machine learning model, it all starts with, basically creating features. Every model is built on the back of underlying features. Features are effectively variables, and they require a lot of computation and data access and various other things. I've been shocked as we work with more of the so-called leaders in the ML automation space. Most of them don't have a feature store. So, what most of them do is once you plug everything in, they will automate the creation of models. But if you're a data scientist, part of that brute force challenge that we talked about is because, for every single model they build, they've got to start from scratch with feature engineering, building and assembling features. So the feature store does a number of things. One is it gives the data scientist and the organization a repository to share features and a library of features. So the first thing you're doing is not saying, how do I create these from scratch, but browsing your feature store to see what features are available for the model you want to build. And it enables you to add to that. So that really contributes to repeatability, systemization, and scale. The other thing is better features will enable you to have better models, which will enable you to have better business outcomes. So there's like a very direct relationship to the quality and accessibility of feature engineering to the end business output. And this is super critical from a business perspective because we see time and time again, like that effort to get the model deployed, often you don't hit the business target, right? You will set a business target for some level of prediction accuracy as an example. And sometimes, the model you build doesn't get you there. So then you have to go back to the drawing board of sorts and kind of look at your features and figure out how to better engineer those features to get a better business output. So I don't know, there's just a lot here, but I think ultimately this is a linchpin element of the process. It's really part of how do you scale AI. And amazingly, the market's not really here yet. Most of the really leading ML technologies out there have a gap in this area. And so this is a really critical place to solve. And Molecula is very well positioned for this, given their lineage in terms of data access, analytics, and computation. That's really the core of how to make this work. And you can see it presents an awesome opportunity to really simplify that middle chunk where most companies get tripped up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that exactly, feature store is an emerging market, and a lot of kind of concepts around feature store today are more architectural in nature. And so, how do you architect an environment that supports a feature store? And so, we're coming at this in a fundamentally different way, with a productized solution that is a feature store at its core. And I think one of the biggest benefits there is the high performance nature of that, and that kind of iterative process that you were talking about, going back and understanding, why is my model inaccurate? What features went into this? What other features, exploring other data sets and understanding what other features should be considered and added into the equation. And so just a quick slide on, Molecula's feature store. As Adam, articulated this really well, we're a centralized repository for all of your distributed data to represent features in that repository. And we're continuously extracting features from the source and also updates. And this part is critical. So in machine learning, particularly in production, you'll see things like human in the loop or system in the loop, validating that the model, what it's doing, what the output is accurate or not accurate, and then providing feedback back to the system so that the model can kind of adjust. And, we see this, for example, at Q2, the use case that I spoke about earlier in financial services, where they are delivering highly curated experiences and content to their banking customers based on the various traits that those customers have. And as customers are, let's say they've paid their bills, and they were going to curate some content around bill pay. They have to immediately have that real-time update into their feature store to be able to know, like, hey, don't serve them bill pay content. They already paid their bills. And that is a really difficult aspect of ML in production today. And what else do I want to call out here? I think, for us, we really want to enable our customers to not have to wrestle with their data and focus on getting value out of data and unlocking new use cases. And so kind of just walking through, our value prop really quickly, Molecula simplifies real-time analytics and AI infrastructure for data engineers by centralizing features and reducing fragmentation, continuously extracting those features and updates from pipelines, and also eliminating band-aids such as like pre-aggregation, joining data, copying data, and those behaviors and activities are what cause the extremely long information request cycles. And Molecula accelerates time from data to decision for data scientists by enabling this continuous millisecond performance on real-time features, which, as Adam mentioned, speeds up model development cycles, it increases model accuracy, and enables faster data exploration periods and high-performance features for training, inferencing, and these real-world updates back to models. And lastly, Molecula helps to control data access, compliance risks, and cost. So when you're only sharing features and not proliferating copies, you are significantly reducing the risk and liability that you're exposed to. And you're also reducing infrastructure significantly because features take up a much smaller footprint than raw data does. And I this is an overview of the technology, and I would love, Adam, for you to kind of talk about in a little bit more depth just how F33 kind of balances out that technology piece with the other pieces that y'all bring to the table.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so companies hire us often to help them figure out how to execute the journey, right? How to execute this transformation from their current state to being more ML driven, more ML oriented in terms of how they operate. Customers tend to start with the technology. We usually try to start with people and process that leads to the technology, because every company is a little bit different. But it's really the combination of these three things, which, in our opinion, unlocks the real potential. So technology alone won't get you there. You have to figure out what is that process to enable you to scale machine learning in your company. Everything from validating use cases, building the right models, testing those models, deploying them, and then iterating, right? So that is a life cycle. It's a process, and it tends to be really more of a data science process than a technology one. We really try to help them figure out, how do you ensure that the data engineering and all the data stack is aligned under it, but giving the data scientist a more pure environment to work within a feature store, to develop models and deploy models and validate. So typically, companies will hire us a lot to help them with a blueprint exercise. Where are they today? What can they do to try to get there, to get to their first model or first handful of models, and then ultimately figure out how to scale that through a process. And we'll generally start with looking at their people, figuring out, do they have the organizational buy-in? Are they aligned culturally around this? Do they have the right roles and expertise? Often we've had customers come in to help us define roles. What are the right roles for them? Great example of that there's this role that we find to be pretty critical called a machine learning portfolio manager, right? This is a person at the organization who can help manage, what are the different ML use cases that need to be deployed across the company, and help different lines of business come and validate whether that is, a good use case for them that will yield the, business impact and returns they're looking for. So we'll start with people. Obviously, process becomes big, and this is where we start to think about this concept of machine learning operations. Mm-hmm. How do you align the technology components and the people with the right lifecycle or workflow to execute this at scale? And then, obviously, the technology becomes clear. What are the right technology components they need? Sometimes that means, as you mentioned, Sarah, at the beginning, we have to start with cleaning out their data garage and getting data ready, prepped, aggregated in the right ways. And then also start layering on what are the technologies that will enable them to automate certain things that can be automated, go faster, simplify where possible. So we think about this really in these terms: people, process, and technology. And it's so true in these ML use cases. But on the technology side, I can't express how excited we are about what Molecula brings to the table, because a lot of this stuff comes down to really, really low latency access to data, really low latency computations, and Molecula has a game-changing solution for that. So I couldn't be more thrilled to partner with you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise. And so we just wanted to share some key takeaways here. And, one being, machine learning is truly ready for broad adoption and really focusing on highly repeatable processes, Shikumika-ing, and having a tech stack that is accessible. And then going back to, what Adam just spoke about, having the right skills in the right roles. And on top of that, a high performance, low latency feature store does change the game for machine learning. And we are so excited for this market to continue to emerge. And it's been such an incredible journey, kind of talking to various analysts and customers and seeing our customers, implement the feature store and truly referring to it internally in different names that are similar to a feature store. Q2, for example, calls theirs a trait store. And so, we see just massive benefits here around, as we've mentioned, fast model development, smoother deployment, and increased model accuracy. And last point here, we have partnered to help businesses achieve cost-effective AI and ML that continuously delivers value. And so if you have any interest in talking with us further about how that might fit into your business, we would love the opportunity to talk with you about that. And we also welcome any questions that the audience might have for us.
Yeah, so a couple came in. I'm going to throw a couple actually at you first here, Adam. So you brought this topic up about with everything changing with COVID, it's going to change how we look at the roadmap moving forward. So how do you convince the business that it's not just a shiny new object? So I will add that it's not. How would you talk to business leaders coming out of COVID that this isn't just a repercussion because of COVID? This is actually something that's going to stick around long term and very relevant long term.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I actually have not seen that pushback at all. I mean, because what we're not doing is we're not talking about a shiny new object from a technology perspective. We're talking about a business outcome. So I actually have customers coming to me saying, hey, we are really struggling with customer churn. Acquiring new customers is, more challenging than it's been in a long time. We cannot afford to lose our existing customers. So can we figure out how to deploy things like machine learning models to predict which customers are at risk of churn even before the normal signals? So if you're a software company, there's a bunch of signals that say customers might be at risk of churn. One might be they've gone quiet. One might be some really sticky support tickets or, low levels of usage in the product. By the time you get those signals, it's probably too late. So you can build models to identify much earlier predictions as to who might be at risk and deploy your precious account management resources to those. So for most businesses, I don't think they view that as a flash in the pan situation. I think some of them are looking at this as like some new realities that they need to be more efficient and smarter in terms of how they approach those challenges. Other examples would be like in manufacturing, how do you increase manufacturing yield? Are there ways that you can predict in the manufacturing process optimizations that can increase yield? Like those are things that I think are time proven, but they're really business impact oriented. I would also say the interesting thing about this for me is the majority of my customers right now are driven by a line of business executive. So someone who oversees distribution, supply chain, manufacturing, growth engineering, things like that. And they're trying to get to some business outcome that they can't get to on their own. They need to deploy a machine learning model and use data to help them get there in a much, much more radically advanced and more efficient way. And so that's, I'd say, the big takeaway we have. And it's why this, people process technology equation is more important than ever, because a line of business executive doesn't care about, they want to get to the outcome. And so you need to help them not only get to the outcome once, but in a way that scales for them as an organization and that we can hand over and their teams can manage and innovate on going forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'll add to that too, in terms of customer churn, just a little bit more granular in terms of what we're seeing with our customers trying to kind of enhance customer experiences, because that has been incredibly important to our customers to, again, retain their customers. And so what they found is that the kind of overnight batch processes or even processes where they're delivering insights 15 minutes to an hour later are still too slow. And they're seeing customers demand more real-time experiences. And so that has been a major push for our customers to have extremely kind of like dialed in timelines around what real time means. And real time means something different for every organization that we talk to. But that kind of latency is continuing to get smaller. And so that's kind of where we step in to really help achieve those types of use cases.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. A couple other questions coming in. David, we're going to get to your question next. I'm going to read this one off. So it's a big setup, so hang in there with me. A lot of the focus in your presentation so far is on the storing and maintaining of data. I want to know more about your involvement in the space of workflow execution. When the rubber meets the road, enterprises need to run a wide variety of library functions on a data set where issues such as framework compatibility and modularity arise. How does your technology interact with state-of-the-art tools in containerization and workflow management systems? That's in the Q&A too, if you either of you need to go back through it.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I mean, that's a great question. I think I'm thinking through like workflow execution tools.
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the things about Molecula that I think is really valuable is the fact that, if you go back to some of the diagrams we've shown, first of all, it doesn't require you to change a lot of the technologies you already have if you want that. So if you've got various different repositories you like, different libraries, you might even be using things like Google Cloud, AutoML, or H2O, or whatever for model development automation. Molecula can snap into that really well from a feature store and data deployment perspective. There are a number of different workflow execution and ML lifecycle management tools out there. I would say that I think that space is fairly nascent today. Like if you think about things like ML flow or Kubeflow or various other sort of ML ops approaches, in our opinion, most of them are focused on the developer today and not the data scientist. And so you could probably bifurcate how you think about workflow execution. One is below sort of the data science level, which is like more on the data engineering side. Data scientist doesn't care about that. Like they come in and they expect the data pipelines to be built and the data stack to be in place. They want to do feature engineering and deployment. So I think you have to think about that in two different ways, but I do feel like, Molecula solves a problem in the middle of that diagram and snaps into both the input and output sides very well.
Yeah, and that's kind of where my head was going. So we want to be an overlay, and we are an overlay over all of these disparate systems. And whatever workflow tools that the end user is leveraging, we kind of sit behind those. So, but that is an excellent question. And I do want to kind of answer containerization. And so, our deployment model today is on premise and or in a virtual private cloud. And that can be deployed using containers. And we also, in the next 12 months, will be delivering a SaaS offering as well, which will be extremely exciting for self-service and kind of continuing that like seamless integration into these various workflows.
Awesome. And if the anonymous user who typed that question would like to ping myself, we can follow up with you for more details as well, and we'll keep you anonymous during this call as well. Question from David, and you all just touched on this as well. It's sort of related, and it goes up to that overlay topic as well. Question from David: does someone think of Molecula as incremental budget dollars, or does Molecula replace one of many current items? Follow up to that: and if you replace a platform, which software is most frequently replaced on a Molecula deployment?
Yeah, so today we are not replacing existing systems. And we still think that, as I spoke about earlier, the data warehouse is kind of coming out of this organizational tension of not being able to access any data at any time, regardless of department, and do what you need with it. And so it's kind of become this like central repository for untransformed, just like raw data to be thrown into. And we still see value in that. How that evolves over time will be interesting to watch. But with Molecula, we are really focused on extracting features out of that raw data. And that could be out of a data warehouse. It could be out of streaming pipelines. It could be directly out of source systems, and making it accessible for specifically analytical and machine learning workloads. So also, like operational kind of OLTP systems are not something that we came close to talking about today. And I think that that's another kind of important aspect of the stack to consider. So as of right now, we are not seeking out to replace any existing systems. But as you saw kind of in that evolution of those blueprints, we absolutely will be kind of moving upstream. And there is an opportunity for us to compete with larger systems in the future.
Good. Another question about use cases. Sarah, you touched on Q2 briefly, very high level. Is there any more details you can share about use cases specifically from all this with the attendees? Or Adam?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many. I mean, I think one of the ones I really love is we've got a financial services customer who has, they're very large. They have thousands of retail banks, and they were struggling with trying to figure out how to solve a really critical and not a new problem, right? So one of the things that banks have to do is ensure that they maintain different cash and currency levels at all of their retail locations, right? Like if you go to a bank, you expect them to have cash. This particular customer had a large number of banks across Europe, and they were struggling with figuring out how to ensure the right levels of cash and various currencies at each retail location. Great problem for data science and machine learning. We helped that customer build a number of models that really predicted day to day how much cash and currency needed to be at each individual retail banking location. But then the other challenge they were trying to solve was the distribution of cash. You guys can imagine, moving money around is very expensive, right? There's a lot of security that goes into that, armored trucks. It's not inexpensive. And so figuring out how to nail that really enabled them to be much, much more efficient. So we built a series of models for this customer that helped them predict the levels, A, and then B, optimize the distribution routes so that they could be as cost effective and efficient as possible. This had a massive reduction of their day-to-day cash expenditure for distribution and just the overall cost with managing all of that, and even enabled them to, as you can imagine, instead of going from like hub and spoke for every bit of cash distribution, rebalance cash and cash currencies between banking locations to maintain those optimal levels. So that's a great example of where we helped them build a number of models. We validated that they had great impact. We deployed those models, and then we really trained the customer on how to get the Shikumika going and systematize that so that they could manage that and evolve it going forward, because frankly, their business evolves and the underlying data sets evolve. And so, the thing about ML models it's not ever a one and done. It's like they're living and breathing because the data underlying those models is dynamic. And so a big part is, what we've found is actually really interesting when you're thinking about use case. The first thing we go in, if a customer says, hey, I want to deploy a model for X use case, first thing we're going to go, we're not going to assume that that's a great use case. Like we're going to go in and try to validate that the models and the data that they have can actually get them the business impact they're looking from a particular use case before we start building that model. And so that's a big part of it, is selecting the right use case, validating it works, and then figuring out how to make that repeatable and scalable as the underlying data is dynamic. So there's so many use cases. I tell my friends who aren't in tech and aren't in ML, basically what we do over and over again is help companies predict really hard things and then use that prediction to optimize business process. And almost without fail across every single industry, that's what we're doing over and over again. And that's really what ML is.
That was awesome. And I think in our space, we're seeing use cases, a significant amount of use cases in healthcare, life sciences, pharmaceuticals, clinical research, really around diagnosing patients sooner and faster and in a more personalized way. And in the kind of financial industry, we've talked a lot about various use cases. Fraud detection is one that's been around for a long time, but continues to evolve. And so that is a huge focus for us. And then also IoT devices and being able to essentially do analytics and machine learning at the edge and understanding point of failure for various devices, predicting when point of failure is going to happen, when was the last time certain devices were maintained, and understanding when and where to go and replace and update those.
Cool.
Awesome. And we are just on our last minute here. I don't know if we have one other question. I thought I had seen one.
Double checking on that.
Okay. Well, we can wrap at that. Thank you so much for everyone's engagement and attendance. Adam, thank you for joining us and sharing your insights with us. And we hope that everyone has an awesome rest of their Wednesday.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone.